Venus and Adonis was the first history painting that I attempted, on and off between 2013 and 2015. As the subject of the first work published by William Shakespeare in 1593, it seemed a fitting way to begin my own body of work. Shakespeare's narrative poem elaborates on Ovid's much shorter account in Book 10 of the Metamorphoses, and departs from that story in ways which were motivated by prints of paintings by Titian and especially by the Flemish Mannerists, to whom I looked for inspiration as well. In Shakespeare's version, Adonis is a mortal man of such beauty as to make the goddess of love herself fall in love, and yet Venus finds him indifferent to her advances because Adonis's only love is for the hunt. She tries to coax him down from his horse to speak to her, but Adonis has no patience for conversing with women. Undeterred, Venus drags him down by force, lies down beside him, gazes into his eyes, and talks of love. She tries to coax a kiss from him, but still he wishes to depart. Adonis manages to get away, but only to find his stallion galloping away with a mare, preventing him from going hunting. Again Venus approaches, and again she speaks of love, and again Adonis spurns her, upon which Venus dramatically faints away as if to die of unrequited love. For fear that he has killed her, Adonis kneels and caresses her, upon which Venus promptly recovers and completes the conquest. Venus is eager to see him again the following day, but Adonis resists, insisting that he has plans to hunt the wild boar, upon which Venus has a vision of his impending death, and warns him that if he does, he will not come back alive, but to no avail. After a fruitless wrestling match and a lecture from Adonis on the difference between love and lust, Adonis leaves and Venus weeps. The following morning, Venus goes in search of Adonis. She hears his dogs crying in the distance and hurries in their direction, only to find the dogs injured and Adonis dead, killed by the wild boar. Devastated, the goddess of love ordains that henceforth love shall be mingled with suspicion, fear, and grief, fickle, false, and full of fraud. From the soil soaked in Adonis's blood, a white and purple flower grows, white being the color both of a cadaver and of purity, purple being the color of blood and of mourning. Venus departs to confine herself on the Isle of Cyprus. In Ovid's version of the story, Venus is a reluctant participant in Adonis's hunts, constantly fretting about her clothes and her complexion, and fearful of dangerous wild animals. Shakespeare's Venus is herself a wild animal. She is not at all self-conscious, but ruled entirely by her passions, and she goes about naked, having no more fear of the elements or shame of her nakedness than Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. The better to turn the story of Venus and Adonis into an allegory of lost innocence, the fateful discovery of self-consciousness, shame, and death. In Shakespeare's poem, Venus is clearly intended to represent the human soul and Adonis the body, anima and corpus being masculine and feminine in Latin. Their union represents the hylomorphic union, as an Aristotelian would say, of body and soul in one substance, united by the primary passion of the soul, which is love. Venus's vision of Adonis's imminent demise represents the opening of the eyes of the intellect. Upon attaining the age of reason, the soul projects itself into the past, causing shame, and into the future, causing worry. The soul discovers that it is not what it could and should be, that its nakedness and abandonment to bodily passions is a shameful condition, and moreover that it will be separated from the body, for although the soul may be immortal, the body is fated to die. Fearful of death, Venus implores Adonis not to go, but go he must, because death is the defining fact of the human condition. Confining herself in mourning, the soul resigns herself to death by embracing the mortification of the flesh, symbolized by a flower of purity and of mourning. The moment that I have depicted is that of Venus's last desperate entreaties to stop Adonis from going on the hunt, which is the same moment depicted by Titian. In Ovid's version of the story, Venus simply warns Adonis of his impending death after a night of lovemaking, and then she leaves. Some decades before Shakespeare, Titian was the first to turn the scene around by depicting Adonis rushing off to the hunt and Venus desperately trying to stop him. The arrangement of my painting was inspired by the Flemish Mannerist Bartholomeus Spranger, while the soft atmospheric style, brown harmony, and unified local colors were adapted from Anthony van Dyck. Turning again to matters of technique, it is worth addressing the role of geometry. There is a debate among contemporary academic painters about whether geometric grids, also known as compositional armatures, should be used to design a painting. Many artists are dismissive of this practice, while others insist that it is the secret to good design. I have found grids to be a useful tool in designing my own paintings, and I'm also convinced that Renaissance painters made good use of them. There are countless ways to subdivide a rectangle geometrically. Many are mathematically significant, but not very useful for the purposes of design. What really counts in a painting are relations that can be seen with the naked eye, or at least sensed intuitively. In the most traditional grid used by Italian Renaissance painters, one begins with the simplest possible division of the rectangle in halves and along the diagonals. Further divisions build on this foundation by way of symmetry, parallelism, and perpendicularity. I tend to think in terms of two grids, one consisting of vertical and horizontal divisions, the other consisting of diagonals and orthogonals. Ideally, the canvas should have proportions which relate these two grids in a visually pleasing way, which only happens when based on a square root. The canvas for my painting of Venus and Adonis is based on the ratio of 1 to the square root of 2, and this is a beautiful proportion because the orthogonals coincide perfectly with the halves, so that the two grids relate to each other in the simplest way possible, as can be seen in the diagram. When it comes to designing the figures in relation to the grid, there must always be a hierarchy of emphasis. For example, the dominant lines in my painting of Venus and Adonis consist of the diagonal, which runs through the figure of Venus, and the orthogonal, which passes along her shoulders and arm. The opposing diagonal and orthogonals are also stated, but with less emphasis.